Welcome to Therapy Crime Scenes, where I dive into the psychological underpinnings of true crime scenes, but not to sensationalize, but to understand. I'm John Cordray, a licensed professional counselor, and today we're exploring the interesting case of Sheree Spencer. It's both heartbreaking and complex, and it's a really interesting case to look at through the lens of mental health. Sheree Spencer was convicted in 2023 for years of physical and psychological abuse against her husband, Richard Spencer. This case challenges us to look beyond the surface and ask, what drives someone to inflict such harm? What mental health indicators might explain Sheree's behavior? And what can we learn about the motives behind her actions? Let's approach this with curiosity, compassion, and a commitment to understanding the human mind. But before we begin, I want to offer a content warning like I always do in these cases. This case can involve scenes and topics that can be triggering for you. If that's the case, then I want to encourage you to pause and reflect on whether or not you continue watching. You may want to watch a different video to make sure that this isn't too triggering for you. Sheree Spencer's story is one of stark contrast. To the outside world, Sheree was a high-achieving professional. She was a project manager for a prison, a mother of three, living in a 7-bedroom home in a picturesque York village. She mingled with high-performing figures, even reportedly connecting with the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But behind closed doors, Sheree subjected her husband Richard to 2 decades of abuse, physical assault, verbal degradation, financial control, and even acts of humiliation like defecating in their home and forcing him to clean it. The abuse was captured on nanny cam footage, which ultimately led to her conviction for coercive and controlling behavior and assault in February of 2023. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, a case the presiding judge called the worst case of coercive and controlling behavior they had ever seen. As a counselor, my role is not to judge Sheree, but to analyze the psychological factors at play here. What mental health indicators might have contributed to her actions? What motivated her to exert such control over Richard? And how does this case challenge our assumptions about domestic abuse? Let's start unpacking the mental health indicators. When we look at Sheree Spencer's behavior, several mental health indicators emerge from the available information that we have. While we don't have access to her clinical records, and I'm not diagnosing her, patterns in her actions suggest areas for exploration. I want to speculate what's going on here, but it's not an actual diagnosis. One of the most prominent indicators is her reported alcoholism. Sources noted that Sheree consumed up to 3 bottles of wine daily, a level of alcohol use that points to a severe substance abuse disorder. Alcohol can exacerbate underlying mental health issues, impair judgment, and amplify aggressive tendencies. In my practice, I've seen how chronic alcohol use can erode emotional regulation, making it harder for individuals to manage anger, shame, or insecurity about lashing out. Alcoholism alone doesn't cause abuse, but is a significant risk factor. It can lower inhibitions, distort perceptions, and fuel cycles of guilt and rage. For Sheree Spencer, her drinking may have been a coping mechanism for deeper psychological distress, which brings us to another mental health indicator: potential personality pathology. Her prolonged pattern of coercive control, manipulating Richard's social connections, controlling his finances, and gaslighting him into believing he deserved the abuse, suggesting traits associated with personality disorders such as narcissistic or borderline personality disorder. These connections often involve difficulties with empathy, intense fear of abandonment, or a need for dominance to mask insecurity. For example, Sheree's use of gaslighting, dismissing Richard's experiences and framing him as the problem, points to a need for maintaining power. In narcissistic personality disorder, individuals may project their insecurities onto others, using control to bolster a fragile self-image. Borderline personality disorder can involve intense emotional volatility and fear of rejection, sometimes manifesting as controlling or aggressive behavior to keep a partner close. Again, I'm not diagnosing Sheree, but these patterns align with what we know about her actions: isolating Richard, threatening false accusations, and escalating to physical violence when her control was challenged. Another indicator is a possibility of unresolved trauma or attachment issues. While we don't have direct evidence of Sheree's early life, many individuals who perpetrate abuse experience trauma themselves. In my work, I've seen how insecure attachment styles developed from inconsistent or abusive caregiving in childhood can lead to maladaptive behaviors in relationships. Someone with an anxious or disorganized attachment might resort to control to prevent abandonment, perceiving any independence in their partner as a threat. Sheree's reported jealousy and efforts to isolate Richard from friends and family could reflect such dynamics. Finally, we can't overlook the role of stress and societal pressures. Sheree's high-powered career and role as a mother of 3 likely created immense expectations. For some, the pressure to maintain a perfect public image can mask private turmoil, leading to what we call masked depression or suppressed anxiety. If Sheree felt unable to express vulnerability, her control and anger may have been distorted outlet for these emotions. These indicators, like alcoholism, potential personality pathology, trauma, and stress, provide a framework, but they don't tell the whole story. To understand Sheree's actions, we need to explore her motives. Why did she abuse Richard for over 20 years? What drove her to maintain such a relentless campaign of control? So let's dig into the psychological motives behind her behavior. Motives in abuse cases are rarely singular, and Sheree's case is no exception. One primary motive appears to be power and control, a hallmark of coercive control as defined by psychological and legal frameworks. Coercive control isn't just about physical violence, it's about systematically undermining a partner's autonomy. Sheree's actions, destroying Richard's property, controlling his sleep and toilet use, and threatening false accusations were designed to strip him of agency. This need for control often stems from a deep-seated insecurity or a fear of losing the relationship. In Sheree's case, her alcoholism and her personality traits may have amplified this fear, making control a way to stabilize her emotional world. Another motive could be shame avoidance. Sheree's public persona as a successful professional and mother contrasted sharply with her private behavior. Abusers sometimes project their shame onto their victims, blaming them for perceived failures. When Sheree called Richard names, she may have been deflecting her own feelings of inadequacy. In therapy, I've worked with clients who externalize shame through anger or blame, unable to confront their own vulnerabilities. For Sheree, Richard may have become a scapegoat for her internal struggles, especially if alcohol clouded her ability to self-reflect. A less obvious motive is dependency. While Sheree controlled Richard, she may have depended on him emotionally and practically. Her threats to falsely accuse him of abuse suggest her fear of losing him, as those accusations were a tool to keep him trapped. This paradox, controlling someone while fearing their departure, is common in abusive dynamics and aligns with borderline personality traits or anxious attachment. Finally, we must consider the role of societal reinforcement. Sheree's ability to maintain a flawless public image suggests that she was adept at maintaining a public image. In a society that overlooks female perpetrated abuse, she may have felt emboldened, knowing her actions were less likely to be scrutinized. This isn't to excuse her behavior, but to highlight how cultural blind spots can enable abuse. Richard himself noted the stigma that male victims often face, which Sheree exploited by threatening to portray herself as the victim. As we reflect on Sheree Spencer's case, it's tempting to see her as a monster, but that oversimplifies the complex human nature. In my work as a counselor, I've learned that understanding doesn't mean excusing. Sheree's actions caused immense harm, and Richard's courage to share his story highlights the devastating impact of her abuse. Yet by analyzing her mental health indicators and motives, we gain the insight into the why behind her behavior, which is crucial for prevention and intervention. This case challenges our assumptions about domestic abuse. We often picture abusers as male, and the victims as female. But Sheree's story reminds us that abuse transcends gender. Men are significantly less likely to report domestic abuse. In the US, 97.2% of men do not report domestic violence to police. While men experience domestic violence at lower rates than women, it remains a significant issue. Social stigma, stereotypes of masculinity, and fear of not being believed contribute to the underreporting among male victims. Richard's decision to install nanny cams and eventually report Sheree took immense strength, especially given her threats to manipulate the narrative. For mental health professionals, this case underscores the importance of screening for substance use and coercive control in therapy. If Sheree had sought help for her alcoholism and underlying issues, could the cycle of abuse have been broken? It's a question that we can't answer, but it highlights the need for accessible, stigma-free mental health support. Therapists often use tools like the power and control wheel to identify abusive behaviors and work with clients to address underlying issues like shame, trauma, or insecure attachment. Sheree's case is a call to action. If you or someone you know is involved in domestic abuse, seek help. There's resources like the National Domestic Violence Hotline in the U.S. to offer confidential support. And if you're struggling with anger control or substance use, reaching out to a licensed professional counselor can be the first step towards healing. Sheree Spencer's case is a stark reminder that abuse is a human condition, not a gendered one. By examining her mental health indicators, alcoholism, potential personality pathology, trauma, and stress, and her motives of power, shame avoidance, dependency, and social enablement, we see the complexity of her actions. Richard's story is a testament to resilience and the power of breaking silence. How can we foster a world where victims feel safe to speak and those struggling with abusive tendencies feel safe to seek help? Thank you for joining me on this edition of Therapy Crime Scenes. What did you think about Sheree Spencer's case? What did you think about Richard not saying anything until years later? It is an interesting dynamic of the victim who feels entrapped. But oftentimes we see this with people who have been abducted as well. They connect with their abuser in a way that doesn't make sense to us. But somehow, at some point, Richard had enough. He sought help. He wanted to get evidence that he had to go and share that with the authorities. Now imagine being Richard. This is someone that you've been married to, the mother of your child making this abuse. I'm sure he questioned himself. Sheree was very manipulative and she was very abusive. And you hear that over and over again, you start to believe it. So at some point with Richard, he had enough. He wanted to seek help, and that is awesome. And if you're in a relationship that's similar to Sheree Spencer's case, I want you to do the same. Reach out for help. If you need to, get evidence and then get help. It is a very difficult situation, especially if it involves a loved one. But don't put it off. If you're in an abusive relationship, get the help that you need. And if you see behaviors of Sheree in yourself, I want to encourage you to get help as well. There's no shame to go to a therapist and say, I know I have an abusive tendency here. I want to get help for my anger. I want to get help for my need for control in relationships. There's help out there. You have to seek it. Don't put it off. It's not going to go away on its own. Thank you so much for watching this edition. I would love your input into this case. If you have other ideas, if you want me to talk about other crime scenes, let me know. I'm always looking for ideas to be able to look at the crime scene, not to sensationalize it, but to look at the mental health indicators, because this is a human issue. This is a human topic, and it happens all the time. We want to get to the bottom of it and maybe prevent other tragic things from happening in the future. Thank you so much. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye-bye.